It's a pleasure to talk with you this morning and about CECI, and which is aimed at reporting Canada's environmental trends. And Canada certainly has a long history of reporting environmental indicators and reporting in various initiatives over the last 3 decades. Now, CECI is coming up to its 5th birthday, and we thought it appropriate to share with you where CECI is at and get ideas for the future. So where did CECI come from? It actually started with a prime minister who decided that he needed indicators on the environment analogous to those he had available for Canada's economy. So in May 2003, the National Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy was tasked to develop a small set of high-level indicators of concerns to Canadians that could link the environment and the economy. NERDI conducted major consultations and a research process with stakeholders, indicator experts and scientists, and recommended 6 indicators of natural capital. Based on those recommendations, 3 environmental indicators of the highest importance to Canadians, namely air quality, water quality, and greenhouse gas emissions, were chosen for implementation. And then from Treasury Board allocated funding for fiscal years 2005 to 2006, from 2006 to 2008, 2009, and then as well in January 2009 as part of last year's budget and the Canada's Economic Action Plan extended funding for another year. So since its beginnings in 2005, the CECI initiative has taken a systematic national approach to developing and reporting on the core environmental indicators, engaging interaction between the environmental policies and core socioeconomic priorities. Care is taken to ensure that the indicator data is sound, the trends are real, and the coverage is national and comprehensive. CECI has brought and continues to bring together information and data from our partners. We work with Statistics Canada and Health Canada for socioeconomic information. We also work with our territorial and provincial partners for monitoring station data. We have 437 water quality monitoring stations that we get data from. We have close to 200 air quality monitoring sites that we receive data from, 350 greenhouse gas emission facilities, and now this year, we're also adding protected area information. In terms of, CECI helps fulfill a number of legislative commitments. So the first one being the Canadian Environmental Protection Act that requires the minister to periodically report on the state of Canada's environment. As well, the Department of the Environment Act requires the minister to initiate, recommend, and undertake programs that are designated to provide Canadians environmental information in the public interest. And the new Federal Sustainable Development Act is, of course, where indicators will likely provide a role in measuring progress towards sustainability. And Greg Wilburn will be speaking to you about this shortly. So in terms of the key roles of environmental indicators, of course, I don't think it would be news to anyone in this room that they're absolutely essential to provide reliable long-term trend information, and that having this information is essential to have informed and sound decision-making. Indicators highlight trends in a transparent and accountable manner based on sound, consistent, and scientifically accepted methodologies. For decision makers, the indicators need associated socioeconomic context. What are the areas placing pressure or driving the indicators? This understanding of the underlying linkages allow for comprehensive and informed integrated decisions for programs, policies, and services. And lastly, I should mention on this slide that CECI indicators are showing up in important policy and program reporting. We annually report in the Government of Canada's Canada Performance Report. As well, we've been integrated into the HRSDC Wellbeing Indicators, and as well the information is integrated internationally into a number of reports, for one example being the OECD Environmental Performance Reviews, and as well others. So key accomplishments over the last few years. In the first 3 years of CECI, they were primarily focused on developing a consistent approach to tracking and reporting the main indicators, including building and nurturing key partnerships, continuous improvement to the data, and ensuring that the methodologies were sound. In 2007, the focus shifted just slightly as the indicators and the reporting relationships matured, and we recognized the importance to ensure uptake of the content with key clients, and specifically linking to broader awareness of the indicators and demonstrating their values to our stakeholders. So the CECI program in 2007 and 2008 undertook a couple of feedback reports, and the results of these two studies basically confirmed that Canadians who were interested and concerned about the environmental issues were a key client group along with policy decision makers. And when we talked with Canadians, they basically told us that when they reviewed the material, they found it actually a little bit too scientifically technical, and the jargon was a little heavy for them. And they basically said that they needed the material written in in plain language for them that they could understand. They also told us that they felt that the national trends were important and that they were interested to know them. And as well, they wanted to know not only the national trends, but as well what was going on within their own backyard. So both the local and the national levels. And they were interested to know how Canada was doing internationally, so our comparison there. We also interviewed experts and so on, and to find out what they needed. And they basically told us, in terms of the text and what is written on the website or within the report, folks like yourself know that information already. You don't need that. Basically, you want access to the data. And so we took that to note as well. And everyone said, why are you still writing paper reports? Get this stuff on the web, please. So the CECI 2008 release included various web improvements, and we have continued to work in this area this year. We worked on a web mapping application that allows drill down from that national, regional, and local scale. We also hired a writer-editor skilled at taking scientific content and getting it for a public audience. So what can the CECI indicators provide on an annual basis? So obviously, as I've mentioned, the national indicators are provided for the areas of air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, water quality, and this year protected areas. And as well, we have in the pipeline indicator on water quantity. These indicators are compared at the provincial, regional, and in some cases where it makes sense at the ecological area level as well. We have included comparisons of Canadians' progress on the international scene and the world stage, and we provide information about the pressures on the indicators. We also provide content related to the environmental health and economic impacts, and include a What Can I Do section that basically gets at household behaviors and being more specific to Canadians of some of the things that they can do in terms of decreasing pressure on these indicators. And includes a data sources and methods section. That's basically is our goal to be transparent with how we're calculating and the sources of the indicators. And last year, and it was the first year that we allowed the downloading of the data for every map chart that was included within the CECI indicators. So this next slide just shows an example of one of the key national trends. So in this case, air quality. And the two air quality indicators included within CECI are ground level ozone and fine particulate matter, obviously two key elements of smog. The information is calculated from the National Air Pollution Surveillance Network, or NAPS, and population weighted and averaged at the national level to provide the national result. So for the first one, ground level ozone, the data is from 1990 to the most recently reported year of 2007. A statistic trend has been obtained as demonstrated by the line on that chart. And the ground level ozone has shown an increase of approximately 13% from 1990 to 2007. For particulate matter, there's been no statistical trend that's been found from 2000 to 2007. However, given that particulate matter 2.5 has been linked to health concerns and is a key element of smog, it is important for the government to continue to monitor it. The next slide on greenhouse gas emissions shows its integration with economic indicators. So comparing Canada's greenhouse gas emissions to GDP can help to show how efficient sectors in the economy are restricting emissions while producing goods and services for our consumption. And there are a couple of ways, and in particular this chart is considering GHG emissions. One way is to calculate the amount of GHG per gross domestic product, Or another way is how much GHG emitted per person. So these two indicators show the relationship between the size of Canada's population and the amount of GHGs produced. They also show how efficiently sectors in the economy are restricting greenhouse gas emissions while producing goods and services for our consumption. So the dark blue line shows that from 1990 to 2007, the amount of greenhouse gases emitted per person in Canada rose by 6%. And in 2007, each person in Canada produced 22.7 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent of GHG. The yellow line shows GHG per GDP and that more economic activity in 2007 for each ton of GHG compared to that obtained in the 1990s. The next slide is on methodological improvements to the water quality indicator. So continuing to improve indicator methodology is also key for CECI. For CECI 2009, we made some major methodological improvements to the WQI. In previous years, we had calculated that indicator using data from all of the 435 sites within Canada that met our data requirements. But this criteria led to an overabundance of sites in the south of Canada and very few sites in the north. So for CECI 2009, we took a careful look at the sites and selected core subsites to calculate the national WQI. And the sites were chosen based on their ability to represent Canadian watersheds. The criteria used to select the core set of sites included hydrology, the way the water flows, one site per river, and human land use along the river. So, for example, if there were multiple sites along a river, we chose the most downstream site. And we looked at human activity on the shorelines and classified the sites to the activity, so agriculture, mining, urban development. This activity allows us to create a core set of sites of comparable size and land use to allow for better comparison of water quality across the country. Now, we didn't lose the data for those remaining local sites. Data for these local sites are still available through CECI in our In Your Region tool. So this next slide shows the water quality by monitoring station and that In Your Region tool. The CECI 2009 WQI results were based on 153 core sites. It's hard to see on this particular map here, but the core sites are represented by diamonds on the map, and the local sites by circles. The majority of rivers and lakes in Canada had fair or better water quality. 39% of the sites monitored rated freshwater quality as good or excellent. It was fair at 43% and marginal or poor at 18% of the sites. Water quality was assessed using the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment Water Quality Index. Parameter selection was based on data availability, human areas of concern, and the available of suitable water quality guidelines in each of the jurisdictions. Now, again, just to plug a little bit, the In Your Region tool, it's a very simple to use functionality within our website. You can easily go to it and select the map of interest, whether that be water quality, air quality, or greenhouse gas emissions. You can then either select the province that you're interested in or simply put the first three characters of your postal code, click on Get Map, and the application will zoom into the monitoring stations of interest. You can then click on the particular monitoring stations perhaps closest to you and then get information on the indicator for that particular monitoring station and also the station details. This last chart shows protected areas and how Canada compares internationally. Canada, of course, is a large country, so it is interesting to look at these comparisons in a couple of ways. The chart compares the selections of industrial countries, largely G8, as shown by the darker green bars, and Canada is fourth in total area protected behind the United States, Russia, and Australia. However, for the lighter green bars or wider bars, the average proportion of land area protected within this group is 16%, and Canada is sitting at about 10%. International comparability can be challenging. However, for protected areas, there is an accepted categorization based on IUCN categories. It can still be challenging to ensure that all countries are utilizing the IUCN categories consistently, but that is certainly a good step there. CECI also wants to ensure that it's meeting the needs of its key target audiences. So an engagement strategy has been developed. We're hoping to understand the needs of our clients, broaden the awareness of the CECI information and data, promote the use with our partners, and influence decision makers and Canadians with regards to that CECI is the authoritative source of Canadian environmental indicator information. We're looking to package the information in a variety of ways to meet the needs, and these are important objectives for us. So there's been work underway, and we've definitely looked at a number of engagement opportunities, and today is obviously one of those for us. As well, we've developed some newsletters and some various other materials, so we're hoping that we can share that with you over the course of the next couple of days. So CECI 2009 is due to launch in the next few weeks. So the priorities beyond that include we're looking to continue to track and report on priority environmental sustainable issues to Canadians, and where required, expand the indicators. We're looking to continue to improve the delivery on our website and perhaps link into some social networking sites as well. And continuing to implement a quality assurance framework, especially if we're looking at onboarding new indicators and to make sure that they're meeting CECI standards prior to launch, and to track and look at our program evaluation and listen to our feedback, client feedback. So just to wrap up, this last slide just sort of gives you the URL to our website. So I suggest you go and try that in your region tool. And as well, Dennis and myself will be around during the conference, so please feel free to come up and talk to us. But our email addresses are there for the group, and my own personal email address is there as well. So thank you very much.
I was almost debating not doing the presentation since Darlene had actually already taken you part the way through it. But my name is Greg Wilburn, and I'm the Director of the Sustainable Development Strategies Division at Environment Canada. We're the group that is responsible for the implementation of the Federal Sustainable Development Act. And I'm very pleased to be here this morning to talk to you about the important role that we see the indicators playing in the next step in sustainability planning and reporting at the federal level in Canada. I want to start out by giving you a little bit of a sense of the purpose of the presentation this morning. What we want to do is we want to outline an approach to sustainable development governance that would better reflect international best practices, that will address issues noted in internal management reviews, research findings, and input from the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development, and strengthen the science policy connection through the strategic use of indicator information. I was telling, actually, Laszlo and Darren this morning that the 19-country study that they did a few years ago on best practices in governance for sustainable development is still actually having a major impact on our planning for the federal strategy. In practical terms, a federal sustainable development strategy is a planning tool that has a potential to be a real step forward in transparency and public accounting on sustainability, but only if there is a connection to the indicators, because you cannot understand the relationship among the various elements of your strategy if you're not benchmarking, reporting on progress, and assessing gaps. So I'm going to talk briefly about some of the best practices that are informing our work right now. Give you a bit of context on the existing system using some of the assessments offered by our colleagues at the Commissioner's Office as a proxy for the overall shortcomings that have been determined with the process, and then give a little bit of background on the Sustainable Development Act. And then, I'm probably an uncommon manager. The brains of the implementation I brought actually with me to speak to some of the important factors in performance measurement. We'll be talking about the characteristics of the governance structure implied by the law. We'll be talking about indicators in the FSDS, and we're going to be talking about bridging that science policy divide through the application of the indicators in the SD, in the overall SD management frame. Now, in terms of international best practices in sustainable development planning and reporting, we owe a great debt to a number of organizations, not the least is the International Institute for Sustainable Development, the United Nations Commission on Sustainable Development, the OECD, who has produced two guides, one on producing national strategies for sustainable development, and then best practices in sustainable development, as well as other observers. The Commissioner has certainly made a huge contribution domestically. There are some key characteristics that, in order to have a good planning system, need to be in place. One, you need a legislative underpinning. The development of your planning and reporting documents can't be optional. There needs to be top-level leadership and accountability. There needs to be relevant and comprehensive strategy. You need to be not just focusing on the silos, you need to be looking horizontally across organizations at what their contribution is to your goals and objectives. There has to be a connection to fundamental planning and budgetary processes. If they are not integrated, then sustainable development is viewed as an add-on, as opposed to something that is integral to the overall business management of your organization, whether it is a federal operation or a private sector organization. And you need consultation with stakeholders, including other jurisdictions. And that speaks to transparency. And that transparency is a function of your indicators. So existing federal practices. For those of you who aren't aware, the federal government has actually been in the business of sustainable development planning and reporting since 1995. There were amendments made to the Auditor General Act that required ministers to table departmental sustainable development strategies every 3 years. The sense was that by producing these departmental strategies that were relevant to each individual organization's mandate, that the aggregate of the activity underway within federal departments would present a comprehensive picture of activities to achieve sustainable development across government. There was unfortunately no overarching federal strategy. And as a consequence, what we wound up with was 32 documents separated from the overall planning process that were established basically related to departmental mandates. So the process was not as effective as it could have been. That's putting it mildly. As a proxy for some of the shortcomings, I'd like to quote some of the observations made by the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development over the course of the last decade of assessment of the departmental approach. Lack of clearly defined federal priorities, lack of a common vision, and lack of meaningful targets. Poorly defined federal accountabilities and a lack of senior level leadership. Departmental compartmentalization, which discouraged horizontal collaboration. Lack of a means to measure and report on federal progress as a whole. And the strategies were not the drivers of change that they were intended to be. We had 32 actors acting separately. Now, that's not to say that the process did not in fact have value. We learned from the experience. And to be quite frank, sustainable development is now a more common, it's been more integrated into federal policy than it has been in the past because we have had the obligation to do the departmental strategies. Now, the question was, were the departmental strategies as effective as they possibly could be? I don't think there's any doubt that there's room for improvement. This can be summed up very, very nicely by a quote from Joanne Jelena, who stated in the report in 2002 that the challenge faced by government with respect to sustainable development planning and reporting was that each department was trying to assemble a large jigsaw puzzle without the picture on the box. Fast forward to 2008. Just a side observation, I always thought it was kind of odd that the federal government's obligation to report on sustainable development was in the Auditor General's Act and not in a standalone piece of legislation. 2008, Parliament passes the Sustainable Development Act, and the Act has a specific purpose and specific accountabilities. Unlike the old process where the accountability was spread across 32 separate federal departments, we now have a requirement for the Minister of the Environment to produce a federal strategy every 3 years. The purpose of the Act itself, to provide the legal framework for developing and implementing a federal sustainable development strategy that will make environmental decision-making more transparent and accountable to Parliament. Managers in public service thrive on clarity, and this was a huge improvement for us in terms of being able to identify a specific role for Environment Canada in terms of the planning and reporting. Now, the requirements of the Act actually lay out a bit of a logic model. The federal strategy must contain goals, targets, and implementation strategies. There's requirements in the Act for consultations. There's the transparency. The federal strategy is to be released this year and updated every 3 years hence. Departmental strategies are due to be released in 2011, and they're to be updated every 3 years. And at the end of the day, there is reporting to the public and to Parliament through progress reports published by my office, the Sustainable Development Office, at least every 3 years. Colin. Out with the old, in with the new.
Yeah, so Greg's been around a little bit longer than me, but he gave the history and the change. So now we have a list that looks a lot closer to the best practices list we identified at the beginning of the Act. We now have a legal foundation in the Federal Sustainable Development Act. It covers all of the federal government. We have a requirement for a results chain, goals, targets, and implementation strategies. And we have an opportunity to link sustainable development planning and reporting to core government planning and budgetary processes, getting right at the heart of it all, not being an add-on. We have greater transparency through the consultation requirements. That includes Parliament, the public, and a Sustainable Development Advisory Council that is put in place and mandated through the Act. And we now have a basis with the logic chain for continuous improvement laid through the comprehensive reporting and indicator use. So this links very nicely to indicators, because the requirements of the Act suggest that for each element of the FSDS, there will be a need for indicators. At the goal level, we're going to strive to have high-level state-of-the-environment type indicators, including the CECI indicators we've been talking about. At the target level, we'll have some of those state-of-the-environment type indicators and some of the pressure driver indicators, the ones that are influencing the end state. And at the implementation strategy level, we'll have lower-level but related performance indicators of specific programs or policies. So as a result, the Act sets up, or has the potential to set up, a really nice plan, do, check, and improve cycle over time. The established goals and targets and related indicator information can provide the tracking needed to improve SD policymaking and programs over time. The reporting would ensure transparency and accountability and provide policymakers with access to information to support decision-making. And the updated strategies every 3 years could set the stage for further progress over time as we learn from experience and build on best practices.